Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, August 22nd, 2019, first day of school in our little school district here, and so things in great upheaval, but we are on the air, and we more or less got the schedule down. I believe I forgot an item or two in the school bag this morning. Nothing major, still working the kinks out here, but new school morning routine to get used to, and I guess now we're in a situation where if they ever miss the bus, we're down to one student at home now. If he ever misses the bus, we're doomed because the bus comes about, it's supposed to come about 3 minutes before showtime. So if that happens, I don't even know what we're going to do. So I guess he'll be extremely late, or we'll walk to school, or, we'll figure it out. I hope we never have to. Anyway, it is Thursday, time for yet another show, and, the president continues to be kind of crazy, so we'll follow along with that one. I note this morning that the NRCC is fundraising. They always are, but this time fundraising with a T-shirt of a U.S. map that includes Greenland, according to the tweet of Casey Tolan, politics reporter for the, San Jose Mercury News, Merc News, yeah, I think so, and the East Bay Times as well, Oakland-based California writer who says, it is interesting. A T-shirt with the U.S. map and the U.S. Or the territory of the United States, including Greenland, is overlaid with a stars and stripes flag motif. I don't know how they get the blue field in order to make that work. It comes way down low, and the stripes go way up high as they actually do. With Greenland on it, just really interesting. Anyway, it adds to my theory that the buying Greenland thing is just the new Kofefe actually means something, and he actually totally meant to tweet that sort of instance here. All right. Well, all in good fun, I'm sure, except for the fact that the president is crazy and everybody knows it, and it's troubling in that sense. I'll share the picture with you in the roundup, of course, in case you haven't seen it being retweeted this morning. So it says, along with the map of the United States, including Greenland, there is the slogan, support President Trump in his efforts to help America grow, by, I guess, buying Greenland. Okay. Well, it does happen. They do these things all the time. All right. What else have we got here? I noticed, Scout Finch, Jennifer Hayden tweeting something else out today. I guess that's relevant to that story. A video of Ted Cruz from 2016 when he was running against Donald Trump in the primaries, saying, warning a potential President Trump might end up nuking Denmark. How do you like that? Well, should we actually take a look about that? And I guess that's more relevant than ever. And the pull quote from it that Jen has tweeted out here. We need a commander-in-chief, not a Twitterer-in-chief. Oh, he nailed him on that one. We need someone with judgment and the temperament to keep this country safe. I don't know anyone who would be comfortable with someone who behaves this way, having his finger on the button. And I guess there's more here. I mean, we're liable to wake up one morning and Donald, if he were president, would have nuked Denmark. That's not the temperament of a leader who will keep this country safe. It isn't. Except, I don't know. I mean, is the temperament of a president? Someone who licks the boots of that person if they accidentally or purposefully, thanks to interference from, who knows who, Russia, the NRA, the same people acting either as NRA officers or Russian intelligence officers switching back and forth, some combination. Who knows who else might be in there? Jim Comey throws his memo into the middle of all this. And here you have it. Now, if you're the kind of person who says that that's troubling, but you're also the kind of person who will knuckle under later on and say it's fantastic and lick that person's boots as they do it, I don't know if that's the temperament we need for the presidency either. Okay, let's see. Not popping up immediately to the top of my windows today is Skype on the one computer where it counts. Not sure why that wouldn't happen, but we got a chance to listen to more of the music as we did yesterday. Greg Dworkin, heralded by that music. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm beginning to like that music.
Yeah, all right. Well, as long as you get to hear it too, I can just let it keep playing until I guess you give up and say, no.
Yeah. I think I've heard that one before. Let's try a different variation of that. You know, it's Pachelbel Canon just played, 99 times.
Well, then we'd look for a wedding to start at some point.
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay.
So a lot's happening.
Yeah.
But let's just put things in perspective. Trump's crazy, and if the numbers are correct, he's not going to get reelected.
That is good.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
All right. Yeah, anything can be a TED Talk now.
Yeah, I suppose. Space B&B had, I think, the best tweet of the week. She said, some people think he's playing chess when actually his aides are trying to stop him from eating the pieces.
He thinks they're chocolate.
Yeah, pretty much that's what happened. So let's go through some of this because we got numbers. Numbers are always nice. Let's start with G. Elliott Morris. We were talking about him just the other day.
Yes.
One of the political scientists who follows this stuff. And he says, look, the president's number may improve between now and Election Day in November next year, but he's going to have a hell of a time getting reelected if he's at 41%. That's what he was with CNN. So today, AP NORC poll comes out. NORC is the group, NORC is the group that does the polling for AP. About 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of President Trump's overall job performance, according to a new poll. 36% of Americans approve of the way Trump is handling his job as president. 62% disapprove, but my favorite was the next paragraph. The numbers may be ugly for a first-term president facing re-election in 14 months, but they're remarkably consistent.
Well, it's a nice, smooth, even ugliness.
Exactly. Trump's approval rating has never dipped below 32 or risen above 42 in this poll since he took office. By comparison, Obama's approval never dropped below 40 in polling by Gallup. So a different pollster, but making the point that he's not especially popular. And wait, there's more. That's not the only poll out this morning. Ben Castleman and Jim Tankersley, writing in the New York Times, say economic anxiety among voters is a sign of vulnerability for Trump. So rather than an excuse to vote for him, this is now an excuse to vote against him. So remember, all of you people out there who were racist but didn't want to tell people, so you said you were economically anxious and that's why you were voting for Trump. If you're still racist but economically anxious, you can vote against Trump. It's okay. You have permission.
All right.
Polling suggests that worries about the health of the economic expansion cross party lines, which is important. And the two of them, note, even before swings in the stock market, voters were expressing doubts about the state of the national economy, according to polling conducted by the online research firm SurveyMonkey for the New York Times earlier this month. Nearly 3 in 5 respondents to the survey said they were worried about the economy, regardless of whether they were personally struggling or doing well financially. And that group cuts across party lines and encompasses a large group of voters who could collectively sink Mr. Trump's re-election chances. I'll mention some industries in a minute, including 3 in 10 Republicans and 7 in 10 independents. 7 in 10 independents. Let me repeat that. 7 in 10 independents. This fits the Rachel Bitecofer theory that the independents this year resemble Democrats, and why 2020 is going to look very good for Democrats. Now, I have to be fair and say that, by her way of thinking, because the Democrat winds up winning the election in 2020, 2022 is going to look awful for us, but we'll get to that. I think the important thing is 2020 and what happens there. And don't forget, 2020 is a census year. So it's vitally important that 2020 be the good one for us. Okay. Anyway, back to this piece here. Consumer sentiment, as measured in both the Times poll and in several long-running surveys, remains relatively high, particularly among Republicans. And voters approve of Mr. Trump's handling of economic issues more than of his job performance overall, which is a point that a lot of people seem to make, and it's true. But, what does it mean when you look at the big picture? When I go over the Bulwark piece about forests and trees, this is one of the trees. You can pick out stuff that looks good for Trump, but when you step back and look at the big picture, it doesn't look so good.
Okay.
Right? So, great. His handling of the economy is better than everybody's thoughts about how he does everything else. But everybody's thoughts about how he does everything else is in the 30s.
Yeah.
Right? And approval of Trump's handling of the economy is like 49 in the last NBC Wall Street Journal poll, 50, 51. I mean, he barely gets positive ratings for that. And yet, it's true. They're better than everything else he does.
All right, so that's
because everything else he does
spot.
is really bad.
I guess so. I mean, it's like those, all volunteers take one step forward jokes, right?
University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index declined this month to one of its lowest levels of Trump's presidency, in large part because of a sharp confidence drop among Republicans and independents. Pew reported this month that under half of Americans have confidence in Mr. Trump's ability to make good decisions on the economy. Just under half. Okay. And that's the strongest thing, right? So I guess I made the point with that. Now, if the economy stays strong, it could present an opportunity for Mr. Trump to win over skeptics. That's another one of those trees we'll talk about when we get to the forest. On the other hand, if the economy tanks, maybe not so much. And it doesn't have to go into full recession for that to happen. So let me switch articles here, switch gears. And having presented the fact that his numbers aren't so good and the economy is the strongest thing, which isn't really that strong, both in terms of his numbers and in terms of the economy itself, Jonathan Last has a really interesting piece in the Bulwark today called A Tale of Forests and Trees.
Oh.
Okay.
All right. Well, yeah, it sounds like you were going to get to that.
Right? A half-remembered parable. About 20 years ago, Malcolm Gladwell, I think, maybe wrote a piece. Maybe it was in blank. I don't know. It stuck with me, but not well enough to tell you where it's from, he's saying.
Research? Nothing? Okay.
It was a little nugget about test questions.
Okay.
Right? Either naming state capitals or ranking the 5 biggest American cities by population. And student population in some other country scored much higher than Americans. And I know. Clearly the nugget didn't stick with me enough, he writes. I wish I could find the exact story and the exact details. But here's the point. If you ask foreigners or Americans which city's bigger, San Francisco or San Antonio, right? Foreign students tend to get the question right, and Americans tend to get the question wrong. But is it because foreigners know more about those cities? And the answer is no. Americans know quite a lot about the cities. They know San Francisco is the heart of Silicon Valley, the birthplace of the technology economy. Apple and Google and Facebook are based there. They know it has Alcatraz, Golden Gate Bridge, 5 professional sports teams. They may know about its microenvironment and the fact that it's beautiful and that these humongous hills make it difficult to walk, but fun anyway. And San Antonio, on the other hand, is a Texan city with the Alamo, good weather, nice downtown, famous Riverwalk. And because they know so many details about the two cities, the Americans came up with the wrong answer. In other words, the old saw about forests and trees is based on something real. Sometimes knowing too many details means you weight the details you know more heavily than the bigger underlying facts, which is more or less how I think about the 2020 election, he writes. The more you know, the more you can talk yourself into exotic theories about how, if the Dems do this and Trump does that and the economy's just right and one cohort of voters in Michigan hangs tough and New Hampshire flips and the split electoral vote in Maine matters, then Trump gets reelected.
Okay.
And that's all true. You can absolutely see how Donald Trump pulls off reelection. He has a path. On the other hand, if he came down from Mars and you spent 10 minutes getting your arms around the 2020 election, here's what facts would jump out at you. In 2016, Trump lost the popular vote by 3 million votes. His approval rate has never been over 50%. For almost the entirety of his tenure, his approval rate has moved between 39 and 46, 36% in the AP poll. He trails all 4 of the potential Democratic nominees in matchup polling, and he trails his most likely opponent by double digits. And looking at those facts without knowing all the intricacies, you'd think, well, he's widely unpopular and has been widely unpopular for the whole of his tenure, and voters are already saying they prefer other alternatives. And what's remarkable about the base facts of this campaign is that they've been largely unchanged for 3 years.
Yes.
More people voted against than for. The majority of people do not like him. They don't like the job he's doing. The majority of people polled prefer the top Democrat candidate. And none of this has changed for 3 years. And maybe it'll suddenly change, but don't bet the milk money on it. On the other hand, if you're really into trees, you can find examples to support whatever you want. If you want to argue that Trump's likely to be reelected, you could point that the unemployment rate is 3.7%. That's the second lowest number since 1969. That's half a century. Or, as Wallace Shawn might say, it's inconceivable that a president with the lowest unemployment numbers in half a century would be defeated for re-election. And the problem is, there's always another tree. Like this piece yesterday in Business Insider. Remember I said I was going to go over industries? What's going on in the trucking industry? Verdant Labs analysis of Federal Elections Commission data. And remember, truckers are one of the most conservative groups you can find. They spend all day listening to Rush Limbaugh on the road. A Verdant Lab analysis of Federal Elections Commission data found that nearly three quarters of truck drivers are Republican, one of the most conservative jobs in America, along with surgeons and farmers. And truck drivers supported Trump in droves. 75% they plan to vote for Trump in 2016, up from 66 who voted for Romney. But a sharp downturn in the trucking industry and a slew of tax changes have hampered their ability to make a living. And many connect these two trends to Trump's economic policy.
Oh, no.
He's not affected our business in a positive way. He's killing our business. If consumers aren't buying, there's no demand. This isn't a political leaning thing. It's business.
Demand-siders, truckers.
Right.
Weird.
So they go into that. And this is not good. And it's really hard to spin data points like this in a good way, he goes on to say. So don't lose sight of the forest when you're looking at the trees. Coal workers are really into Trump because he's going to bring back the coal industry.
That's what they wanted.
But Moscow Mitch is blocking pension resolution votes, and there are some benefits that might expire that are up for grabs as well, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it, so the coal miners are not happy. Farmers are getting killed. We talk about that all the time on the show. And so we got the truckers as well, and you put that all together, and some of his core constituents are not particularly happy right now with the economy and its economic base in terms of why they're unhappy. And that's why he's switching to culture war and going all in on insulting Jews and insulting Denmark. And by the way, the Icelandic prime minister said she doesn't have time to meet with Pence when he comes there in September. Her schedule's just too busy.
She's Iceland is a busy place.
Iceland is very busy, Yeah. So it's just a lot of things going on with that. But you put that all together, and it's just he's not in a particularly good position. Again, this doesn't predict that he loses. I keep saying that. But what I'm fighting against is the perception that somehow or other Trump is the favorite. He's not. He's actually got a pretty uphill climb. Even Charlie Cook, in his latest piece for National Journal, pointed out that these numbers are not particularly good, however you look at it. And yes, there's 15 months to go. It's a long way. But right now, these are not good numbers.
It's the sort of thing about which you would say from the White House that the fundamentals of his reelection are strong.
Yeah, strongly negative.
Yeah, to say that they are not, obviously, is the best reading of all of that, and usually portends disaster when people say fundamentals are strong.
Right. So I'm looking to see on our, there it is toward the bottom. I have a little piece by Sophie Hill on Twitter, a little mini thread.
Okay.
And I want to talk about this because your listeners may say, okay, David, why is Greg going on and on and on and on about what the media thinks and what the headlines are and what's the big deal there? Who cares whether Trump is considered to be the favorite or not considered to be the favorite? I hate polls 2016 and, and whatever.
I see. All right.
Well, I have an answer for that. I have a plan for that. So this is Sophie Hill, who is a poli-sci PhD student at Harvard, and posted a bunch of links, which are really interesting yesterday. And she titles it a mini thread on some new and very exciting experimental research on the effects of media on political attitudes.
Okay.
Bonus.
Read it.
It's all open access.
All right.
Okay. First up, a new paper in POP Public Sphere that shows Republican voters viewed Trump more negatively when randomly assigned to see more headlines about the Trump-Russia scandal.
Okay.
If you took newspapers, not published papers, but newspapers, and had a bunch of Trump appeared to collude with Russia, or Trump aides are in jail, they're found guilty, and stuff like that.
Things that are true.
Okay. The effects seem to be driven by the balance of headlines seen by the respondents rather than close engagement with the content of the stories. In other words, the headlines really matter. And we get mad at the New York Times for writing a really stupid headline like no evidence of this, this or that, whatever. I'm trying to think of the one that they wrote about no evidence of Trump campaign working with Russia,
right?
Or something along the lines of Trump attempts to bring the country together when in fact he's flaming he's fanning the flames of divisiveness, something like that.
Greenland spat.
Yeah, they matter. Those headlines really matter because that's what people come away with. They don't necessarily even read the story. And then she writes, note, the author argued this by showing the effects persist when they control for number of clicks. Whether or not that's true or not, the headlines do matter. And interestingly, being exposed to stories about the Trump-Russia scandal did not make Republicans more likely to report negative views about the media. So if you have a range of outlets all saying the same thing in different ways, those headlines make a difference. And the way that you get it done is you have not just one headline, so you can pick on the New York Times, but multiple headlines across multiple platforms. That's how things sink in.
Okay. That's
so for us critics who say, look, the New York Times and other people really have to get their act together in terms of headlines. They spend all this all this money hiring writers that can write good stories and investigate and do their professional job as reporters. In a lot of ways, the headline writer is actually the more important group. If you want to influence people,
and they undo the work of the writers if the stories tell the story correctly, and sometimes they don't. But imagine the frustration of having reported the story correctly, only to have it destroyed and undermined by a bad headline.
Right, and then you pick on the reporter when, in fact, you should be picking on the editor. So Sophie Hill says, to me, this is consistent with a simple heuristic. While voters might dispute a particular news story that runs against their attitudes, when they see a story featuring prominently across a wide range of outlets, they're more likely to take it seriously. And this certainly helps to shed light on why preponderance of coverage can be just as controversial as media slant. For example, coverage of Hillary's emails, the BBC's controversial policy of balancing opposing viewpoints. And I would throw in something else that I see a lot. Very conservative pundits really into trying to get out there as much as possible that the squad is anti-Semitic.
Yes, they love it.
It's really important for them to get that story out there so that a lot of people cover that, because it's a counter to the fact that Trump himself is anti-Semitic and did all this ridiculous stuff. In fact, Trump's being anti-Semitic and talking about dual loyalties, really bad stuff, is actually overshadowing their efforts to do that, because it's all part of, however you feel about the squad. And I'm not particularly thrilled about, all of them in terms of all of their policies, all of their attitudes, and all of their media coverage. But the idea that if you can get it out there somehow that they're anti-Semitic, that's somehow going to help Republicans pick up Jewish votes. That's really what that's about. Mm-hmm. And so why is it important? Because of this kind of research, getting those headlines out there. If you see it over and over in different outlets over a series of days, does make a difference to voters.
All right.
That's why people do that.
Intuitive.
Oh, sure. They may have their absolute convictions and such, but that's not necessarily what's going on here.
All right. Well, that seems natural enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's a people. If you're a writer, if you're a pundit, you like to influence people. So how does that done? Well, you try to get the same. You try to get your issue over as many different outlets as possible, so that people see it. Now, it also chimes nicely, Sophie Hill writes, with another recent paper that shows summary fact checking, like an overall accuracy rating, has more impact on a politician's reputation than an individual fact check story.
All right.
Okay, so the paper finds no evidence of motivated reasoning, that is, where respondents discount information goes against their existing views. In fact, the opposite. Fact-checking Harry Reid had a larger effect on Democrats than Republicans. Well, that's because we're Democrats. Which brings me to another awesome paper. They provide respondents with positive and negative information about a policy, and contrary to the backlash hypothesis, respondents update in line with the information they receive. So the main takeaway from this Twitter review, based on the evidence, I think most of us are too pessimistic about the effectiveness of information and changing attitudes, even in a highly polarized climate. And allocation of media coverage really does have big implications. So I said to her on Twitter, in other words, we critics were right.
Has she answered that?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But, that's okay.
You critics.
I mean, the point is that yelling at the New York Times about their headlines matters. And yelling at Chuck Todd about what he decides to do in terms of Republicans on the show all the time rather than Democrats,
right,
or leading off with this is a Republican scandal, how will Democrats blow it? I mean, if you keep doing that over and over and over, that's why we always make fun of the Democrats in disarray TM headline, because it just gets out there. And so kind of everybody knows it.
Okay, so I mean, it does feel like we were right about that.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was
wonder what
interesting,
that'll be
and I think it's worthwhile paying attention to when you see those things. And the fact of the matter is that all the bad news about Trump being crazy, and we'll go into details after the break about Denmark and dissing on the Jews and thinking all Jews are Sheldon Adelson, and also information that gets out there about detaining migrant families indefinitely and not giving them flu shots. All that stuff matters.
Yes, well, we'll need to have
because
some
you're going to see that
headlines
among
on
multiple
things.
outlets, and it's going to be repeated over multiple days.
Yeah, well, I hope it sinks in. I mean, it's a kind of a controlled environment. I guess the real tragedy of it is that the vast majority of his voters aren't actually exposed to that. They've found a way, and have been provided intentionally with a way to stay in a sheltered environment where they only see pro-Trump headlines. But, okay, but for that, I suppose, exposure to the truth might lead them to reach the conclusions that are true. So, okay.
Trump at 36%.
Yeah, well, blare it across the headlines as often as you can and find some way to crack into their little worlds. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Ed Roots Radio. We continue into our second segment, having learned that headlines matter. I believe as a result you have more of them. Is that right?
Yeah. So also footnotes. Now, nobody did study on footnotes. I don't think they matter as much.
Yeah, they don't seem to influence people.
Right. So here's a really interesting one here.
All right.
Anthony Scaramucci and the 9 biggest 180s on Trump ranked.
Huh.
Right. Aaron Blake was having fun with this.
That. Okay.
Right. Who are the people that have turned the most on Trump? And he's got people like Ann Coulter, Mike Pompeo to a certain extent, Jason Chaffetz to a certain extent, Mulvaney. But, some of these are going from you're terrible to, okay, I'll work for you.
Yeah, right.
Others, like Andrew Napolitano, Judge Napolitano on Fox, Scaramucci, are going the other way. Okay, and who is the number one flip-flopper? Lindsey Graham. I just thought that was fun.
Yeah.
But if you take a look, to me, there, sometimes we have these discussions online or offline or on the air or off the air. What's the deal with never Trumpers? Well, never Trumpers who are actually never Trump are an interesting group, even though they're a small one. Never Trumpers who became pro-Trumpers are probably the worst of the worst. I mean, if you have to look at character, quality, who you would trust on anything, the person that he left off this list that I would have put at number 2 is Hugh Hewitt. And people like Hewitt and Graham, who said during the primary, they're terrible, okay, I changed my mind, I'm for him, and now shill for him. I think are just the worst of the worst characters in terms of, of American character. The only thing lower on the food chain, under yeast and bacteria, would be people like Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah. Well, it is particularly annoying. I don't really pretend to understand why people do that, or how people live with themselves when they do it. I guess they just do it for personal advantage. I can understand
They do.
that.
They're doing it to sell a book or to be on TV, or I got nothing else in my life. But, think of the bright side. Again, looking at this headline theory, if people close to Trump, like Scaramucci or Omarosa, say stuff like this, and Scaramucci is trying to recruit some of the ex-cabinet members who have left. If the inner circle people say stuff like this, they're likely to be better messengers for whatever independents and I'm not sure I held my nose for Trump voters in the first place. Those are the kinds of headlines and messages that they see. So, there's some value in there in putting it out there, although there's little value to us. They're not going to tell us stuff that we already know. But, maybe they can be a messenger for somebody else. In any case, I did want to throw in here, just because I don't want to forget about it. The Variety has a headline here. ABC News sets moderators and rules for the third Democratic debate, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. It's September 12th and September 13th, Thursday and Friday, if more than 10 candidates qualify, which seems likely.
Okay.
They may have as many as 11. They'll have 10, I guess. If Tom Steyer qualifies, then they'll have 11, or they may have 11 already. ABC News has announced the moderators for the third Democratic debate, and it'll be George Stephanopoulos.
What? No way. Yeah.
David Muir, Lindsay Davis, and Univision anchor Jorge Ramos.
Okay. They have tried that before.
ABC News is partnering with Univision for the debate, which will air live on both networks from Texas Southern University's Health and PE Arena in Houston, Texas. Now, in order to qualify for the showdown, candidates must receive 2% or more support in at least 4 national polls or polls conducted in the early voting states of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. They also must have received donations from at least 130,000 unique donors, with a minimum of 400 unique donors per state in at least 20 states by August 28th in order to qualify. And I would point out that August 28th is in 6 days. So if you haven't qualified by now, you better get that last poll in, if there are going to be last polls.
Trying to get that 400th person in Alaska or whatever.
Yeah, if more than 10 candidates qualify, seems likely, and was the case for the previous 2 rounds of debates, then 2 nights would be required. But here's the interesting part to me. They're going to have a selection event. It's going to randomly assign. They're not going to do contenders and kiddie table. The format of the debate will be 1 minute and 15 seconds for direct responses and 45 seconds for rebuttals. Okay. So they'll have more time to talk, in other words.
Well, yeah, sure. After the first 40 seconds of thank you for the opportunity and how are you, George? And okay.
The moderators may well have a difficult job on their hand keeping the candidates to those time limits. I would point out the moderators better do a better job of making the time for the candidates and shutting up and not dominating the whole thing by talking and talking and talking with a 17-minute question.
Yeah.
Chuck Todd.
I don't have any real sense about whether Stephanopoulos is better at that or not.
Well, they've had a lot of
Chuck Todd's the worst
feedback by now in terms of how people looked at it, so hopefully. All right. Now, the others saw plenty of barbed comments falling back and forth, and between Biden and Harris, they note. So hopefully we'll have some back and forth there, too. So that's there. And you got to have that 2% poll rule. You got to get the 4 polls above 2% or more. And so there are some people who haven't made it. And in fact, because there are some people who haven't made it, some of them are starting to drop out. Jay Inslee is out as of last night, and he will go back and run for governor. And Hickenlooper is out, and he has announced today that he's going to be running for Senate.
Oh, hey, what do you know?
So he'll be running against Cory Gardner.
Okay.
Now, there are people in Colorado who say, well, big whoop, he's a centrist. We need somebody that's a little bit more liberal. The more important thing, in my view, is beating Cory Gardner. So I don't really care which Democrat does it.
Yes.
I'm a vote blue no matter who person. And you know what? It's up to the Colorado folks to sort that out with their primaries and however they do things.
That's the way it works.
That's the way it works. So I'm not taking a position on that. Whoever wins, wins.
From outside of Colorado, I find that easy to say, too.
Yeah, vote for the Democrat of your choice.
You got it. I will have no choice. I won't even get to vote for that person.
So there's that. Now, what did Trump do in the last 24 hours that was so crazy? Well, you know, this Greenland thing, as the New York Times points out, seemed like a joke, and then it got ugly.
Yes.
And when you read the stories about this, it wasn't just a throwaway line. Trump was actually thinking about doing this for a while. Reporting says that he had actually talked about his National Security Council and gave them the task of figuring out how to do this. And it seems to be tied up with Superman 1. He really did want the ice to melt so he can get all the resources. But at the same time, in years past, Greenland had an Air Force base, and it was used to patrol the Arctic and have planes up there which can land their bombs in Russia or missiles or whatever. And so he sees it as a strategic port, if you include airports, to help to control the Arctic from especially the Chinese, but also the Russians. So he was serious about it.
I mean, in a way that Alaska isn't. I mean, that's at least right in the middle of that sphere. That's why we bought Alaska.
I don't know enough about it to go as to why you need Greenland in addition. But I'm just saying, reporting is reporting that he was serious about it. So when Denmark took it as a joke, he was incredibly insulted. Not only did they not get the joke, but he was actually serious about it, and they took it as if he was a clown. And that got him mad. And so he was really nasty about it. And, of course, the fact that it was a female prime minister that told him no just made it worse. And finally, the New York Times says it exploded into a serious diplomatic rupture between the U.S. and one of its longtime allies. So what happened is Denmark, who has been with the United States on so many things, supplied troops to help us wherever we were fighting, all of a sudden is told that the prime minister is nasty. And he tends to say that about women who offend him, like Hillary Clinton, Meghan Markle, any woman who's Nancy Pelosi, anybody who's a woman who says what he doesn't want to hear is a nasty person.
Yeah.
Okay. But this might all have been written off as just another odd moment in a presidency unlike any other, says the New York Times.
I'm prepared to do that.
But attacking Denmark was not enough. He decided to expand his target list to include NATO because Denmark's a member of the Atlantic Alliance, and he chose to do this 2 days before leaving Washington to travel to an international summit in France, which also happens to be a NATO member.
Is he there now?
Not yet, but he's going to go there. And Ivo Dalder, who's a former ambassador to NATO under Obama, says this is yet another blow to American credibility under President Trump. No leader, friend or foe, will take America seriously.
That is true.
So you had the Buy Greenland T-shirt you were talking about. State Department people say American leaders remain concerned about some of the involvements of both the Chinese and the Russians in the Arctic. He's really serious about this. Everybody thinks he's a fool and a jerk and an idiot, and they're right, but he's really serious about this. So don't be wrong about thinking it was just a joke. It's not a joke.
I guess
it's
that
something
means
he
it was
wanted
a joke.
to do.
I don't know. I don't know whether I believe it or not. But okay, that's
the thing about Trump. Nobody wants to believe anything about Trump.
Maybe he was serious about it. Maybe he wasn't. I don't know if it's really possible for him to be serious about anything.
Right. Here's another thing. Let me give you another example of where that comes up. Because nobody trusts Trump about anything, and nobody trusts the reports about this because they're all getting it from, unnamed sources within the White House who don't want to be identified.
Right.
Changing subjects, another topic that comes up is the push for background checks.
Okay.
So Dayton and El Paso happen, and Trump tries to deal with it as president. And the reactions, we talked about this yesterday, I think, in terms of polling, gets 35, 36% marks for how well he did, which is to say he did really poorly, gets mad.
Yeah.
Because people aren't, crediting him with being loved everywhere he goes. So he's really angry. And he wants to do something. So he wants to do background checks. And then he gets a call. And he tells McConnell, I want background checks. And McConnell looks at the schedule and starts to figure out how this works. And McConnell thinks to himself, I'm not doing anything until I figure out where he's going to be in 2 hours. And 2 hours later, he gets a call from his good friend Wayne, which is to say Wayne LaPierre. And LaPierre tells him, and other people within his administration tell him, according to the reporting, that, look, you can't do background checks because if you do, then your base, who loves the NRA, is going to be really mad at you and you won't get reelected. And so he says, okay, well, then I'm not going to do it. And now he's not interested.
Yeah.
And that's how the reporting goes. All right. Did he really want to do background checks? All the reporting says he did. But everybody who watches him flip-flop and doesn't like him figures, I don't know if I believe that. Maybe he never really wanted to in the first place.
Right.
But there's a big difference between stuff he wants to do and gets mad about when it's not done, and stuff he doesn't really care about and is perfectly happy to, have it go out of the news and then move on to other topics. And Greenland is one of those things that he's really mad about.
All right, fine. I mean, I remember how much time
they keep bringing it up.
Yeah. Maybe that's an indication that it was serious, more so than his saying so. I don't know what he's doing, and who knows? I mean, like I said this morning, they also spent a great deal of time, comparatively speaking, insisting that covfefe was a word and it meant something, and he totally meant to type that. So I don't really know what to do.
He doesn't like to be embarrassed, so people will make stuff up. I get that part of it.
Yeah.
But clearly, whether you believe it was meant from the beginning or it was a Pee Wee Herman, I meant to do that, or whatever it was.
I guess they mean it now.
The fact that it matters, is suggested by the fierceness in which they fight the battle. Otherwise, they would say, oh, who cares? Failing New York Times, I don't really care what you say. Let's talk about something else. That's not the approach that they're taking.
Well, it's not getting them any closer to buying Greenland.
Well, it's also not getting them any closer to being reelected, as we talked about in the first segment.
True. So I guess it doesn't matter.
Okay. So this one is from Financial Times, and it's behind a paywall, but let me just give you a feel for it. The next stop on Donald Trump's end of diplomacy tour. If the U.S. president makes it through the G7 without hastening the West's demise, it will be a victory of sorts. So that's what you should look for. This is from Edward Luce.
A low bar story. Okay.
Conservative writer. The one good thing about Donald Trump's failed bid to buy Greenland is that it softens up America's allies for what's to come. This weekend, Mr. Trump will join his G7 counterparts for what promises to be one of the most bizarre meetings in its history. Summits are supposed to make global problems easier to manage. The G7 and the G20 are reaching a point where they result in the opposite, a world less manageable than if the leaders had never met. Mr. Trump's lunge for Greenland was the amuse-bouche before the meal.
I see.
It had all the relevant ingredients. It showed Mr. Trump's transactional approach to diplomacy. A country has a piece of real estate Mr. Trump covets, so he offers to buy it. Perhaps it could work both ways. Russia has long had its eye on Alaska. Second, it underlines that Mr. Trump loathes alliances. By canceling his trip to Denmark over its refusal to consider the sale, Mr. Trump left a close ally in no doubt that its friendship meant nothing. 50 Danish soldiers lost their lives fighting alongside U.S. troops in Afghanistan. I think it's 42 or 43, whatever the number. This death toll is considerably higher ratio to population than the U.S., and Mr. Trump's motive for buying Greenland undercuts a crucial aim of the other members of the G7 to fight global warming. The territory's attraction is that its receding ice sheets will open its land for mineral extraction. He's not going into the strategic parts of it. He's going into the Superman 1 parts of it. Mr. Trump does not, remember that's where Lex Luthor was going to make a killing on beach property somewhere in the Midwest when California falls in the ocean. Mr. Trump does not accept that global warming is taking place except when it offers a chance to make money.
Yes.
Macron, the French president, would have found it impossible to find a choice of words on global warming to which Mr. Trump could have signed up. Little surprised that Macron announced that the G7 would no longer bother with a communique at all. Another day in the Trump era, another president dies. Finally, Mr. Trump's Greenland bid, including the spiciest ingredient of all, his support for Russia to rejoin the G7 5 years after it annexed Crimea. And then, of course, he went into that rant about how Obama was stupid, and that's how Crimea happened. Mr. Trump's philosophy is that each nation should assert its sovereignty, America first, and so on. In practice, he sees a world in which powerful nations' actions are unfettered by global rules. In such a world, small nations matter less. Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea matters as little as Denmark's over Greenland. City-states without sovereignty, such as Hong Kong, can be ignored. What matters is a country's size, not its political system. So the backdrop's ominous. Predictions of a U.S. recession are rife. Mr. Trump's reelection prospects are weakening. Oh, gee, even they see it. Most of Mr. Trump's foreign policy initiatives are crumbling. Top of these is North Korea. And Mr. Trump badly needs a foreign policy win. The obvious one would be China. Most of Europe shares Mr. Trump's fear of an emerging behemoth that does not play by the rules. Unfortunately for U.S. allies, Mr. Trump's remedy is to go it alone. Yeah, Europe wants to handle China with a rules-based approach, and utterance of such words causes Mr. Trump to lose his cool. If he can make it through a French weekend without accelerating the demise of the West, that would be a victory of sorts, but the chances of that happening are slim, so at least you know what to watch for.
I guess so. Another low bar, as long as he doesn't vomit on a prime minister or crap his pants moment. And I think we'll likely see ourselves shifting to, well,
How presidential?
Yeah, right. Either that was a great thing to do, or maybe we didn't necessarily count on him crapping somebody else's pants, but he didn't do that. So
yeah. So if he reads from a statement, because it's not going to be a joint communique, so everybody gets to say their own thing. I'm guessing, we'll see. And by the way, this is another reason why we get mad, going back to that other piece we read. But I'm guessing we're past the point where he says something and everybody says, oh my gosh, look at him, how presidential.
Well, maybe.
Right? I don't think they will. I think we're over that. But if they do, we'll be mad because those headlines matter, and it's part of the normalization of Trump that we were talking about with Sophie Hill's discourse on why headlines matter. Yes.
Well, that'll certainly be where the disagreement plays out. I don't know if we're past it. It seems
we'll
like
this is a testable hypothesis.
Yeah,
but,
the New York Times.
This has been such a bad week for him. I don't know that they're going to go that.
Okay. I mean, man,
I honestly think that the whole zeitgeist has changed after El Paso and Dayton. Not so much in terms of we'll get gun control because, he's not going to, but because of the way people look at him.
I mean, that was the New York Times. That was the instance in which the New York Times went with the
tried to bring us together, and they had to back off. They got hit so hard they actually had to have an internal meeting about it.
They did do that. All right. Well, we'll see whether they were serious about it, and maybe whether they've read this study.
Here's my other villager. Put your finger to the wind. Take the temperature kind of thing. Chuck Todd yesterday on his show.
Yes.
Was furious. It was amazing. I just didn't expect this.
Okay.
What Trump said was so un-American and anti-Semitic that I can't believe that anybody would say shut. I mean, he just laced into him. And that's pretty unusual for a centrist like Todd.
It is, and yeah, I mean, reaction.
Spent the whole show doing that.
That's reaction was predictable, of course. Lots of you're late to it, but thank God you're finally here. Versus there was also like, I'm not patting you on the head for this, Chuck.
Again, I'm not congratulating Chuck Todd. I'm just saying it's there.
I know. You think you're doing it. You're doing your
right.
normal
and
thing.
People who do that are going to have a very hard time the next day saying, oh my gosh, well, how presidential are you?
Yeah, I guess that is it's possible that
they can do it, but they're not Hugh Hewitt.
Yeah. Okay, well, not yet. I guess we'll find out.
It'll
later
take them
whether
2
they
weeks.
are. All right. Well, he leaves for France tomorrow and spends the weekend. Is that basically the schedule?
We'll be hearing about it by Sunday, Monday.
All right. Yeah, well, Sunday shows should get a crack at it, so we'll see what Chuck Todd does with his Sunday show.
So what made him so upset? Well, here's Adam Sower pointing out Trump has more positive feelings toward Jews than Latinos or black people or Muslims, but like other non-white Christian groups, he thinks Jews are conditionally American. Basically, you're American so long as you're loyal to me, and if you're not loyal to me, if you're disloyal, who needs you?
Well, yes,
that's the underlying, a point of all of this that's gotten everybody upset. that somehow or other you get to pick out a group of people and decide whether they're American or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's done that with migrants. He's done that with Latinos. He's done that with a whole bunch of people. Nobody is safe. And this particular week happens to be the week that he picks on Jews. But it's, again, as we talked about at the beginning of the show, all done with the backdrop of a deliberate campaign by Trump and his allies to make the Squad the face of the Democratic Party and try to make the case to American Jews who vote, among others, that the Democrats are anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Mm-hmm. And he's got this thing. Somebody pointed out, I wish I could find it, but very, very good insight, that Trump doesn't really understand the relationship between American Jews and Israelis.
Oh, no, of course not.
That if anything, if you look at Americans and Israelis, we're cousins, not descendants. It's not like our parents and grandparents, if you're an American Jew, came from
True.
Israel.
Yes.
Like other countries.
Big difference.
What happened is, after the war, families separated. One half went here, one half went there. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't have quite the same relationship. Right. And they don't all think alike. And they're not all Sheldon Adelson. And you can't win over the Jews by being hawkish and supporting Likud and saying that I'm for Israel, therefore vote to me. It doesn't work that way at all. In fact, the very values about not throwing people into concentration camps down at the southern border matter tremendously.
Yes, they might.
And so he didn't get any of that. And so that's part of the reason why it's been such a mess these past few days. And that's why Chuck Todd was mad.
All right. Well, I don't know if the Israel thing got him mad, but
it did. That was the focus of the show.
The dynamics of Israel as a homeland versus, like the old country versus the cousin analogy that you give. I don't know if that. I'm sure Chuck Todd. Well,
therefore,
if
you're
that,
Jewish, you must be for Israel in all way, shape, and form.
Yes.
Well, since when has that been true?
If ever, not for a very long time. And that's actually a huge thing that not everybody would get inherently. And I suppose Trump's understanding of Jewish issues and the relationship with Israel comes from whatever Jews he surrounds himself with that he actually trusts, and they're big donors and right-wing Jews and Orthodox practitioners, and that's not representative of American Judaism in general, and nor was it ever really particularly representative of attitudes towards Israel. But he's got a small circle. He doesn't like
get
to
any of
hang out
that,
with a whole lot.
He made it an issue, and it's backfiring on him in a big way.
Yeah.
And it turns out that when you have media pundits who happen to be Jewish, they don't take it very well, and it's been a part of the reason they get mad.
Yeah. Well,
and that's not going to go away, and it's going to be very hard to just turn around and say, okay, fine, now you're presidential because you read from a teleprompter.
I guess so. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think I will still be surprised, even if you're right.
And assure you that this is what will happen. What I am saying is watch it because, observe it because Sophie Hill is right and those headlines matter. Mm-hmm. That's my underlying point.
All right. Well, I'll take that. That seemed very easy to understand.
So there you have it.
All right.
An hour less for you to do. Now you got to do something else for the next hour.
Yes. All Israel, I think, the whole time. Everyone loves
Israel all the time. Okay, why don't you do this show from right to left for the next hour?
All right, I can do that. I'll find a way to do that visually somehow on the radio, in addition to doing it from in the opposite direction.
Oh, let me throw one other thing, completely different topic, but also international. And that is that Rudy Giuliani flew to Madrid in recent weeks and met with the Ukrainian president to try to push him to investigate Joe Biden's son.
Madrid, Ukraine. That's a big misunderstanding.
So in other words,
what?
Yeah. In other words, Giuliani is trying to get Ukraine to interfere with the 2020 election.
Yes.
Otherwise known as collusion.
Yeah, maybe he feels the Russians are too suspect and are being too closely watched, so the Ukrainians will do it.
Basically, he knows they're losing, and he's trying to do what they can to cheat.
Yeah, as outsourcing the investigations, I guess this is an indication that Trump won't be able to fully utilize the DOJ apparatus to get. He can't jail his opponents or convince people to conduct the investigations he wants of his opponents. So Giuliani is going to get the Ukrainians to do it and send us the results.
So I'm just looking. Barbara from Daily Kos just retweeted this. It's a Daily News headline from today. I'm laughing. The big headline is "The Last Whopper," and it's the Last Supper with Trump at the head of the table there. And it says, "The chosen one, Trump eats up King of Israel," label from right-wing conspiracy nut.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's the impossible.
That was Wayne
burger.
Allen Root, who is telling Trump, "No, you're right. Everybody in Israel loves you, and we're going to make you king there."
And Wayne Allen Root he sounds Israeli.
A conspiracy theorist who, was talking about Obama being a birther, among other many other of his crazy theories.
Obama being a birther would be a fantastic theory.
Or Obama not being
yes.
from the United States, the birther theory about Obama he was pushing.
But it would be extraordinary if he could
keep
get
an eye on that too. It's all kind of interesting. But why are they doing this? Because they can't win without cheating. That's why.
I guess not. So all right, that makes it a valuable pastime for them. I'm not sure where the idea that Wayne Allen Root speaks for Israel came from, but I guess he just hallucinated it. And that's
no, he's right. Just ask Sheldon Adelson.
King of Israel. Okay. King Donald. That's
I have to send you a tweet so you can see the coverage.
Okay, we'll take a look.
Otherwise, I'll see you Monday.
Very good. Thanks. By Monday we'll have figured out what happened in France and what the pundits think of it and whether Chuck Todd was really full of it. Thanks, Greg. See you then. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's see how we can carry on themes from the previous hour. Let's see. There were a few things that I thought just went by on Twitter that might make for good follow-ups. Let's see. There was one. Lots of talk about the filibuster all of a sudden in the last few minutes, and we should check in on that. I'm not certain where that's coming from, but always a good topic for us. But I did happen to see a Talking Points memo story go by. The Danish Prime Minister actually thinks her Trump response was very nice. Or if it's read correctly, Danish Prime Minister thinks her Trump response was actually very nice. And Greg tells me the filibuster story arises because McConnell has an op-ed on it, I guess, explaining why it would be a disaster if Democrats took over the Senate and got rid of the filibuster. I think we have a pretty good idea of why he thinks that would be a disaster. Let's see what the Danish Prime Minister has to say here. Nicole Lafond, who is not the Danish Prime Minister, but the writer for the TPM article about the Danish Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of Denmark is defending herself, and if you're defending, you're losing, so don't do that, after President Trump said she was nasty in response to his interest in buying Greenland. I don't think I have been blunt or harsh in this discussion. Prime Minister, okay, ready for some pronunciation, Mette, I'm supposing, M-E-T-T-E, Mette Frederiksen. Pretty easy, I guess, the last name, Frederiksen, told a Danish state broadcaster, this according to Bloomberg, I actually think we have responded very nicely from the Danish side. When you are close allies and good friends like Denmark and the U.S. are, there should also be room for disagreements along the way. I hope we can stop this discussion soon. Trump lashed out at Frederiksen after she said it was absurd for Trump to think he could buy Greenland, an interest that he's reportedly been talking about privately for at least the past year. Trump abruptly canceled his planned trip to Denmark and later confirmed to reporters that he decided against the visit because Frederiksen was, quote, not very nice about the Greenland ordeal. I don't know. I guess you could be, if you were super sensitive, angry about the absurd the use of the word absurd and all of that, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I don't know how good her English is. I'm sure it's fantastic by comparison to our understanding of, say, Danish or any other foreign language. English very widely spoken there, but I suppose it's possible that there's some nuance to absurdity that she may or may not get, or that may be what she meant, and that's actually... she may be saying, he should be glad I didn't say it was effing absurd or use the R word in all of this. This is possible too. I don't know whether that nuance has reached Danish English speakers, that you're not supposed to use that word anymore. That would be a great excuse to re-inject that into the lexicon, which would be extraordinarily disappointing to many people, I know. But, it was not me. I didn't do it. It's not my fault. I don't know. Even though I am sitting here hoping for it, which is probably wrong all by itself. Anyway, that doesn't clear anything up, really. It's just, okay, so she says she thought she was being reasonable in saying it was absurd, and that is really true, and honestly, you should have thicker skin. And if there's anything it looks like Donald Trump has, it doesn't feel like he has thick skin, but he certainly looks thick-skinned. And I wish he could live up to it. Anyway, that's really not super important. Let's see what else. Shall we take a look at the op-ed? Is it worth looking at the McConnell op-ed on the filibuster? I mean, he's just gonna lie about it. But he's got it in the New York Times. Mitch McConnell : and let's let that be the last mention of Mitch McConnell's : the filibuster plays a crucial role in our constitutional order. Democrats who want to change Senate rules for temporary political gain will rue the day as they have before, and that's possible. What he's saying is, if I were allowed to return as majority leader after a Democratic majority changes the rules, I will abuse the new rules like never before, and that's understandable and probably true. I don't know. Do I care to read he wants to be able to filibuster Democratic initiatives, whether progressive or otherwise, and hopes to make it uncomfortable for us to steamroller him later on. I don't know that I care, but duly noted, he has had such a piece published, and people are steaming about it. That's about all I can tell you here. Let's see some comments. Let's see, Michael Musson, a frequent commenter here, pointing out Adam Serwer also pointed out that Trump doesn't think he's being anti-Semitic when he says racist tropes because he thinks they are positive. So that's entirely possible too. So, for instance, one of the earliest anti-Semitic tropes that I know of Trump repeating before he was president was the idea that he wanted Jewish accountants counting his money. Well, anybody could have counted his money at that stage when he was running his casinos. The answer is zero, and that's all the money there is here to count. But he thinks it's, for instance, that it's not a negative to say that Jews are really good at money, or that they really love money, or are money hungry, or however you want to put it, because he doesn't view any of those things as bad things. So, I guess it's entirely possible. It doesn't explain his misunderstanding of the dynamics between American Jews and Israel, but, that's just plain ignorance. And I suppose people who have no particular exposure to the thoughts and feelings of American Jews aren't necessarily going to understand right off the bat, particularly people who have no understanding of history, and he's one of them. But, I suppose if you're generalizing off of the same playbook that we're usually able to work with hyphenized Americans, if you've learned it well, Mexican Americans retain some, let's say, sympathetic ties with the old country, just as German Americans did, Swedish Americans. They move here, they bring some of their culture with them. Armenian Americans, you name it. People who came from X country and moved to America retain some sympathy of some kind. Even if they fled the government there or were oppressed there, there are things about the culture that they might perhaps continue to have warm feelings about it, and they care what happens perhaps to that geographic region and to the people there. Sometimes, of course, people abandon everything and leave it all behind and say, I'm never looking back. But in the main, French Americans would have warm feelings about, they would be loyal to America, of course, this is their chosen home, but they care what happens. If there's a war in Europe and it affects France, they'll be upset about that. Same with Germans, well, even if they started it. You never know. Swedish Americans, even if they're neutral in the war. That was one of the big mistakes that I made the other day, I think, when talking about, I think we were talking about Sweden and their role in World War II. And I think the assumption was that, they would have been an ally in World War II, but they were in fact neutral, the Swedes. Anyway. But this is not, of course, true for Jewish Americans because, well, for one thing, Israel, as we understand today, the nation state, the modern Israel is a new-ish creation. So there wasn't that early 1900s wave of immigration from Israel by Jewish Israelis who became Americans and think about the old homeland. They largely came from elsewhere. And if they have any sentimental ties to the geographic region from which they originally came, that would have been Central and Eastern Europe for the most part. But in many cases, they don't retain that kind of soft spot for where they came from because they didn't have it good there, but they didn't come by way of Israel either. And I suppose if you're used to hearing that Armenian Americans love to keep an eye on how things are going in Armenia, and Greek Americans, same thing about Greece, and Swedish Americans about Sweden. Notice I've never said this about Norwegian Americans. They don't care about Norway. This is a blanket rule. Norwegian Americans, totally apathetic about Norway. I've made that up, but it sounds like it could be true. But if you didn't come from Israel, then there's no particular reason to feel the same kind of sympathy. But there was, of course, especially in the early days after the establishment of Israel, the circumstances under which it was established, and those being closely related to the circumstances under which many refugees, Jewish refugees from Central Europe and Eastern Europe arrived here in the United States post-World War II, and even some who came beforehand who would have lost family in the Holocaust. There was a feeling that, at least for a while, that, Israel was deserving of their support, loyalty being an entirely different sort of feeling that may or may not have manifested itself among people, but it was a big deal at the time to contribute financially, small change out of your pocket, essentially, to help Israel grow, help ensure that there was a Jewish homeland for refugees to go to. And as the nature of Israel changed over the years, that grew to be less and less a part of things. But it's just not the kind of relationship that other hyphenated Americans have with their homeland, because for most it really just never was a homeland. It might be a nice thing to think that it would be for someone else, but that's not the same thing as it having been your own or your parents' or grandparents' homeland. And it was somewhat arbitrary to most people. I mean, for a while it wasn't entirely clear that there would be a Jewish state established in the Middle East at all, that there would be perhaps a Jewish refugee state, but it would be arbitrary and land assigned elsewhere for no apparent reason. But, okay, that didn't happen. That might have made the misconception that all Jews were going to feel wistful and sympathetic towards Israel and everything that they did and long for a return to a homeland that was never theirs might have been easier to dissuade yourself of had they located the Jewish homeland in Sitka, Alaska, for instance. So, anyway, I guess I don't expect Donald Trump's brain to be able to grasp that, especially if the only Jews he knows assure him that the opposite is true and that all true Jews really would feel this bond of kinship and feel like Israel was a second home. But it rarely is that actually the case with American Jews. But, I guess for some. And for some who are rich enough to fly back and forth 10, 15, 20 times, sometimes 10, 15, 20 times a year, whether for business or whatever else, I suppose that feeling would develop. I feel as warm and wistful about Iceland, having visited Iceland twice as often as I've ever visited Israel, as a matter of fact. But what can I tell you? That's why travel is a good thing. It doesn't happen to have anything to do with family relations or religion or anything else. It's why travel is a good idea. You travel to someplace and have a good experience somewhere, and you have a positive feeling about it, and you therefore conclude that the people there were relatively nice to me, and it would be a shame if they were all to be killed for one reason or another. And wouldn't it be best if we were able to work something out where fewer of them died because they all seemed so nice? Or, if they seemed nasty, then I suppose the Donald Trump view of things, right? Everybody he meets in other countries is nasty, so to hell with all of them. Okay. Anyway, enough editorializing about that. I did mention that I had seen some theories about why Giuliani I thought he would have been in Ukraine to talk to the Ukrainians, but as it turns out, he was in Madrid to talk to Ukrainians. The New York Times did some reporting on that story. Giuliani renews push for Ukraine to investigate Trump's political opponents, because Trump has somehow been unsuccessful in getting the government Trump heads to actually do that. And I guess he probably views that as deep state resistance to his agenda. Kenneth Vogel and Andrew Kramer put this story together for the New York Times. Is the headline offensive? I just read it. No, I guess not. Although, I guess the criticism there might be Giuliani renews, it should have said something about renewing the push for Ukraine to baselessly investigate Trump's political opponents. But, the idea is to keep headlines short. Here's the story. Months after backing out of a trip to Ukraine amid criticism that he was mixing partisan politics with foreign policy, both things that he shouldn't really be involved in at all, actually, Rudy Giuliani, or as they say here, Rudolph W. Giuliani, President Trump's personal lawyer, they still say that, has renewed his push for the Ukrainian government to pursue investigations into political opponents of Mr. Trump. Such as who? We'll find out. Over the last few weeks, Mr. Giuliani has spoken on the phone and held an in-person meeting in Madrid with a top representative of the new Ukrainian president, encouraging his government to ramp up investigations into two matters of intense interest to Mr. Trump. One is whether Ukrainian officials took steps during the 2016 election to damage Mr. Trump's campaign. The other is whether there was anything improper about the overlap between former Vice President Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s diplomatic efforts in Ukraine and his son's role with a gas company there. Mr. Giuliani said he was acting on his own as a private citizen with the knowledge and assistance of the State Department, which is maybe problematic. He would not say whether Mr. Trump approved or is aware of the effort. He is and he does. But his outreach is the latest chapter in a remarkable effort by Mr. Giuliani, who conducts private business around the world, doing what I don't know, just like Jeffrey Epstein, to use his status as Mr. Trump's lawyer to try to influence another country's affairs to help his client politically. His previous efforts to pressure the Ukrainians had drawn condemnation from Democrats, and during a trip to Washington last month, Mr. Giuliani's Ukrainian contact was urged by an aide to Representative Steny Hoyer, the Democratic Majority Leader, not to work with Mr. Giuliani on the issues, according to people familiar with the meeting. The conflicting directives from the two parties in the United States highlight the tricky calculus facing Volodymyr Zelensky, a comedian who was elected president of Ukraine, in April by a wide margin after campaigning on promises to root out corruption and to seek a settlement to the war with Russian-backed separatists that has killed 13,000 Ukrainians. The situation in Washington poses an early and potentially significant test for Mr. Zelensky and his fledgling government. Relations with the United States are pivotal for Ukraine. Its army has been fortified by American military aid, including soldiers deployed as trainers, and Ukrainian officials that want to continue, or they do want that to continue. Mr. Zelensky is appealing for greater American diplomatic backing in peace talks. Mr. Zelensky's handling of the requests to investigate the two politically charged matters is likely to upset either Mr. Trump and his Republican supporters or top Democrats, including allies of Mr. Biden, a leading candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. That is a tough situation. Stay out of it. A Ukrainian news site asserted that if Ukraine supports the current president and sells out Biden, it would become a cause of deep and irreversible It would become a cause of deep and irreversible processes, which later will circle back on Ukraine in a very unpleasant manner. I see what you mean. Mr. Giuliani's efforts have inflamed the situation, said several government officials who handle foreign policy in the United States and Ukraine. Speaking anonymously to avoid running afoul of Mr. Trump or his allies, they blamed Mr. Giuliani for complicating efforts to arrange a visit by Mr. Zelensky to the White House and for creating a perception that such a meeting would be contingent upon the new Ukrainian government demonstrating support for the investigations. And the poor guy who has to deal with all this was previously a comedian, right? So he can go to the reception, and Trump will make it fast food, and then the guy can say, "What is the deal with American White House food? Am I right?" And we can all appreciate his comedic intent. I don't know. That's tough work. But, then I was going to say, Al Franken, he really navigated but now he's a bad example to use too. Okay. But for the time that he was there, he did an admirable job in walking that line, I guess, in public, and then who knows what else happened elsewhere in private. And so there are no examples to go to on this. While Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky have spoken on the phone, they have yet to meet in person. Meetings are possible next month, either on the sidelines of the UN meeting in New York or when Mr. Trump attends a World War II commemoration in Poland, as a pro-German source there, I guess, somehow, which is weird because the Russians were on the other side then, but that was where they were communist, and now they're all united in white supremacy. It was like a big waste of time, World War II, in their view. But the Ukrainians covet a White House meeting as a symbolic show of support from a president who has often passed up opportunities to aggressively condemn Russia for its aggression. In an interview on Tuesday, Mr. Giuliani cast his efforts as intended to help Ukraine advance its long fight to root out corruption across its government, including among prosecutors. But he did not totally reject the suggestion that he was complicating relations between the two governments. Well, okay. I can't really evaluate that, whether my involvement in it makes it worse or better, he said. I can't see how advocating for an investigation of two alleged crimes puts too much pressure on them other than doing the right thing, to do the right thing. Like we're pressuring people to do the right thing with impeachment. He acknowledged that he had strongly urged the Ukrainian official, Andrei Yermak, a close ally of Mr. Zelensky, to just investigate the darn things, because he's so diplomatic. A former mayor of New York and federal prosecutor, Mr. Giuliani, conceded that Mr. Zelensky is in a difficult position, but he said, when you have a decision like that, you're going to piss off somebody, so you might as well make the right decision, right? He said he came away from his interactions with Mr. Yermak pretty confident they're going to investigate it. I have my doubts, but you never know. In interviews this month, Mr. Yermak, a lawyer and former television producer who has known Mr. Zelensky for years, said he discussed with Mr. Giuliani both the possible heads of state meeting and the investigations, but he said they did not discuss a link between the two. He said he's very interested in seeing the new Ukrainian government being open and openly investigating all these cases, said Mr. Yermak. And that's interesting in light of the Greenland cancellation, or rather the cancellation of the Denmark meeting over Greenland. I suppose it's possible that they could threaten to cancel these meetings too, unless they get an actual positive response on the suggestion of investigations from the Ukrainians. All right, so he said he told Mr. Giuliani and separately congressional staff with whom he met last month in Washington that the new government was committed to fairly investigating possible crimes, but all decisions would have to wait until the Ukrainian parliament confirmed the new top prosecutor, no earlier than next month. Mr. Yermak said he did not interpret his conversation with Mr. Hoyer's staff as a warning to avoid investigating the Biden matter. Mr. Yermak was dispatched to Washington by Mr. Zelensky last month to build relationships with American officials, discuss possible American sanctions on a Russian oil pipeline, and set the stage for a Trump-Zelensky meeting, for which Mr. Yermak said, "We are waiting impatiently." I don't know whether they're going to get anywhere with this if Putin regards Zelensky. Did I have the? I've already forgotten the name. Yeah, Zelensky. If Putin views Zelensky as a foe, I don't know whether the meeting is going to happen. Unless, I guess, Putin says, well, he's a foe, but he's inconsequential to me, and so for the most part, I guess I'm more interested in you. You can meet with him, and that'll make it look like you're not still colluding with us, so go ahead and do it. And I'm not too concerned about you concluding anything by way of bilateral agreement with the Ukrainians that will be harmful to Russia, because you're not able to conclude effectively a bipartisan or bilateral agreement with another country on anything of substance. So go ahead. You don't worry me. All right. The story continues here. Yermak said it was not clear to him whether Giuliani was representing Trump in their talks. Giuliani explicitly stated that he was not, so that would make it unclear, I guess, to somebody who's anxious to take a American quasi-official at his word. The White House referred questions about Giuliani's role to the State Department, which did not respond to a request for comment because he doesn't work for the State Department. Mr. Giuliani said he briefed State Department officials on the back-channel communications. Everyone loves those. They were arranged with assistance from the State Department, including Kurt D. Volker, the United States envoy to settlement talks in Ukraine's war with Russia, who met at the White House last month with Mr. Yermak, among another Ukrainian official, and top Trump administration officials. Mr. Volker declined to comment on the Giuliani-Yermak talks. Mr. Yermak said he asked Mr. Volker to arrange the talks, and people familiar with the effort said it was intended, at least partly, to turn down the temperature around the issue. Mr. Giuliani was widely criticized after it was reported that he and his associates had been working to advance the investigations with Ukrainian prosecutors who had been appointed under Mr. Zelensky's predecessors and who have been accused of corruption. The prosecutors have been pushing investigations into the gas company for which Mr. Biden's son Hunter worked and the oligarch who owned it. The prosecutors had also been pushing an investigation into Ukrainian officials accused of improperly trying to damage Trump's 2016 campaign. The criticism of Mr. Giuliani escalated after the New York Times revealed that he planned to travel to Kiev in May to encourage Zelensky, who had yet to take office at that point, to press ahead with the investigations. Amid the uproar, Mr. Giuliani, who has done business in Ukraine, canceled the trip, accusing Democrats of misrepresenting his efforts and suggesting that some members of Zelensky's team never intended to give him a fair hearing and were in fact trying to lure him into a setup. He's a very paranoid individual. All right, well, that's the end of that article. And, all right, I think we have a pretty good idea of what he's trying to get done there. But I guess, Giuliani himself is not yet certain whether he's dealing in good faith with actual allies there in Ukraine. It could go either way, and I suppose there's some danger in dealing on behalf of President Trump with the new president of a country who has won on an anti-corruption platform. An anti-corruption platform will not be ordinarily, if honest, willing to work with Donald Trump. However, it is Ukrainian anti-corruption, and that might be a different animal. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see, by way of update, we have information via Twitter here from both from Mike Musson and from Greg Dworkin, and both relevant to the irrelevancy of Greenland, I guess. So we'll take a look. We'll check in on it. Mike sends us a tweet of Bobby Lewis, who is quoting the exchange in the video clip included in his tweet here on Fox and Friends this morning. Brian Kilmeade saying, if we could just get Greenland, everything else will be easy. I don't know what the heck that's supposed to mean, actually. And then Steve Ducey says, I heard Iceland. But I don't know what did he hear. Ainsley Earhart, then, is this real? I don't know. There's a video attached, but it hasn't rendered yet, so I can't tell. Ainsley Earhart saying, Iceland's the one that's green and Greenland's the one that's cold. They're both cold. Kilmeade, right. The Vikings tried to screw us up. Nice try, Vikings. I think they were trying to, if that anecdote has any truth to it at all, I think they were trying to screw up other Vikings and get them to go to Greenland, where it was less green, let us say, than it is, at least during the summer, in Iceland. But okay. But I don't know when he says, I heard Iceland. Is Steve Ducey saying he heard we were trying to buy Iceland? Because that also isn't happening. All right. Well, then Greg sent me a Julia Davis tweet noting that Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton says that he asked the Danish ambassador about selling Greenland several months ago. What an interesting thing to do, just as a senator from Arkansas approaching the Danish ambassador to ask about selling Greenland. I told the president you should buy it as well, Cotton said, adding that Trump, has heard that from me and from some other people as well, with a link to Talk Business. What is that? Talkbusiness.net. Taking a look here. Yeah. Senator Cotton says he asked the Danish ambassador about selling Greenland. I wonder where this came from. And it is, I guess, a legitimate. I don't know whether this is just nonsense trying to cover for this idiotic thing, or whether he thinks this will help him with Trump. I don't see any. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Months before President Donald Trump expressed an interest in buying Greenland, or at least publicly anyway, U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, who also is no genius, if you ask me, said he suggested the idea to the president and met with the Danish ambassador to propose the sale for the large land mass to the U.S. Speaking on yesterday, August 21st, at the inaugural Talk Business and Politics Power Lunch at the Red and Blue Events Center in Little Rock, Arkansas. Arkansas's junior senator said buying Greenland is a no-brainer. Well, I'll agree that that's a no-brainer. If you had no brain, you probably spend a lot of time thinking about that. Obviously, the right decision for this country, Cotton said quickly when asked by Talk Business and Politics CEO Robbie Brock, unless it's Roby, there's only one B in this, R-O-B-Y, Brock, about Trump's Greenland tweets. You're joking, but I can reveal to you that several months ago I met with the Danish ambassador and I proposed that they sell Greenland to us. So why does he think they're joking? Greenland, owned by the European nation of Denmark, and some dispute about whether that's actually the case, whether it would be more correct and more delicate to note that Greenland is an autonomous region of Denmark. And by the way, for the Ben Dreyfuses of the world who insisted that nobody knew that Greenland was a I don't know what they would call it. Well, it's an autonomous region of Denmark, a protectorate. I don't know what they would call it exactly, because I haven't researched it. But there was a part of his tweet thread yesterday, which I included in the roundup from yesterday, even though we didn't read all the way through it, in which he insisted that most people probably thought Iceland owned, to the extent that anyone owns Greenland, that Iceland owned Greenland. Iceland also previously a Danish territory, gaining its independence after World War II, but a lot of the Arctic islands are Danish territories, more or less by default, from the period during which Denmark was the primary power in the Scandinavian region among the and now I'm seeing this questioned about whether or not Finland, Norway, Sweden occupy what I guess is thought of as a Scandinavian peninsula, and so that they would be the only Scandinavian countries. So we actually have Scandinavian listeners who could clear this thing up for us, and possibly Wikipedia could do the same. But that was always my understanding, that there's that sort of family of countries that would also include Iceland. And I think they make it fairly obvious in their flags and heraldry that they all have such similar flags. Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, but also in Faroe Islands, where they are also a Danish territory, but they've got their own flag, and it's similar to the motif of that cross that they've got in the other Scandinavian countries. Anyway, Greenland has a totally different one, by the way, which is very interesting all by itself. Anyway, I don't know. Do we read through all this? I mean, we pick up a few extra facts about Greenland along the way, I guess, including the claim now by Tom Cotton that he's been talking about this since forever. Let's see. Greenland, owned by the European nation of Denmark, has a population of just over 56,000 on the 836,300 square mile island. While its economy is primarily made up of fishing exports and is largely subsidized by Denmark, the land is considered rich in mineral resources. The primary U.S. military base on Greenland, which leads you to wonder, like, well, why would we need sovereignty over the entire island unless there was some threat people felt to our access to the air base at Thule, I think is the pronunciation, Thule, Thule Air Force Base, 750 miles north of the Arctic Circle. The base is home to the 21st Space Wing's global network of sensors providing missile warning, space surveillance, and space control to North American Aerospace Defense Command and Air Force Space Command. Cotton said Greenland's mineral resources and strategic location make it an ideal strategy move for the U.S., noting that such reasons are why President Harry Truman offered $100 million in the 1940s. Cotton told the red and blue crowd that Greenland's economic potential is untold. Well, maybe because there's not much to tell, and the island is vital to our national security, and it really isn't, because we've survived without it. I'm beginning to think that Putin would like to get his hands on Greenland, and there's no chance that he could wrest it away from Denmark without interference from the rest of the world. I imagine the United Nations and others would, and Nor, I guess formerly, that the NATO alliance would have intervened in Russian plans to wrest control of Greenland away from Denmark, presumably by military action. However, maybe Russia gets everything they want out of Greenland, whether it's a base or simply exploiting natural resources there, or who knows what, throwing it into chaos if he believes that's necessary. He could never do that directly with Denmark without everyone objecting. However, if the United States, an ostensible ally of Denmark, were to try and execute the move, but it was done under Donald Trump, who would in all cases accede to any demand Vladimir Putin might make about Greenland or anything else, then they would be able to have their way in Greenland. Maybe that's it. So we're just like a stalking horse for the Russians on this one. Let's see. Anyone who can't see that is blinded by Trump derangement, apparently, is Cotton's line. If you can't see that economic potential is untold, and I'll agree that it's untold. Most people don't tell anything about it. Is it unlimited? Is that what he meant to say? Or hoped you would understand from that, but didn't want to get caught in a lie for some reason? Now he's concerned about lying. It's vital to our national security in ways that have been just completely missed before. I understand Harry Truman may have been interested in it for strategic reasons, but that was in a very different world as well. Anyway, Cotton said in 2018 the Chinese government sought to essentially bribe the local government of Greenland into allowing it to build 3 military bases there. And there they may have a point. You wouldn't think that would be in China's sphere of influence, but China's foreign policy, as we've read here on the show once or twice, it's global in its reach, and that seems to be their primary MO. They're flush with cash and workers and resources and technology that they can export, and they are approaching essentially third world outposts around the globe, wherever they may be, and sometimes not even third world, and offering those resources up to the local governments in exchange for leases on the airports or seaports that they build, or bridges or other infrastructure that they're willing to build. Or I guess in this case, I don't know what they're offering to build, but in exchange for military bases or access to military bases, they would provide Greenland, by most accounts, an underdeveloped territory, with an infusion of capital and infrastructure. Although, I mean, the geography of Greenland currently, anyway, with most of it being covered with ice, and we'll see how long that lasts, is such that infrastructure is not always an easy solution. You can't just build roads or railroads across Greenland. It really all has to be pretty much air transportation. And I don't know how much more the Chinese can contribute to it. But okay, not certain what their deal is. And so, as a result, I guess the United States would have some interest in countering Chinese influence there. But I think Denmark probably has the same interest. It won't be identical to American interests, because I'm sure Denmark probably feels it's out of the threat sphere of Chinese influence. But I guess if they really do consider themselves responsible for Greenland, then I would imagine they're on alert for this stuff. Anyway, Cotton said in 2018 the Chinese government sought to essentially bribe the local government of Greenland into allowing it to build 3 military bases there, but efforts by Trump administration and some in Congress convinced Denmark to weigh in at the last minute and block the deal, Cotton said. I told the president you should buy it as well, Cotton said, adding later that Trump, heard that from me and some other people as well. We read about that before. However, the deal is not likely to soon happen. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen called the idea absurd. Trump responded by canceling a planned state visit. Then he tweets his dumb tweet. about, I don't know, his usual nonsense talking points. Denmark is a very special country with incredible people. What does that mean? But based on Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen's comments that she would have no interest in discussing the purchase of Greenland, which is not bad at all, I will be postponing our meeting scheduled in 2 weeks for another time, Trump tweeted. He should have included the word absurd in that. That would have helped make his point. The Power Lunch series, in case you were interested in that, is managed by Talk Business and Politics and sponsored by Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield. That got thrown in there because this is, of course, an article in Talk Business and Politics, their publication. And I guess that, I don't know, represents full disclosure in their minds. Okay, weird and, mostly, hopefully, irrelevant in the long term. But you never know. Other stories of interest, I saw Anne Marimo, is that how she pronounces her last name, of the Washington Post, I believe, tweeting yesterday about the results in a new or a new stage in one of the many lawsuits pending against the Trump administration. She had tweeted yesterday, breaking, President Trump can appeal ruling in congressional Democrats' lawsuit that accuses him of violating the Constitution by doing business with foreign governments, putting the case on hold. It's an emoluments case, but it has broader implications than just that. The Washington Post quickly put together a piece between the two of them, between Anne Marimo, whose tweet I just read, and David Fahrenthold being the other one of the two of them. David Fahrenthold, always on our minds here at Kagro in the morning because of how much work he's done in digging so deep into the Trump world. But they teamed up for this piece here, headlined, Federal Judge Allows Trump to Appeal Lawsuit Over Foreign Payments Accepted by His Hotels. But follow along with the reading of the story and see how widely, or the wider implications of this story. A federal judge Wednesday allowed President Trump to appeal rulings in a lawsuit that accuses him of violating the Constitution by doing business with foreign governments, putting the case on hold in the meantime. The ruling by District Judge Emmett G. Sullivan effectively pauses a lawsuit brought by, now we know it was an emoluments-related suit, but who brought it? More than 200 congressional Democrats who say Trump's companies, which include hotels, should be prohibited from taking payments from foreign states. There's a domestic violation here, a domestic emoluments clause that's being violated here too, but they're focusing on the foreign in this article. I don't know how they focus it in the suit. Trump has argued that Democrats do not have legal standing to sue him in the first place. You'll recall that earlier an emoluments suit filed, and it is mentioned in this story, filed by the attorneys general of D.C. and Maryland, was dismissed for lack of standing. And I think we found out then that the Trump lawyers were determined to try and rid themselves of this lawsuit by the members of Congress on the same grounds because it had worked for them, I guess, in this other suit. But it's much less clear that members of Congress would be without standing on a question of the emoluments clause, given that one of the provisions of the emoluments clause is that emoluments could be accepted by a president who has explicit congressional authorization to do so, and that by withholding that authorization, or I guess even by offering it, the Constitution would appear to assign a very clear role to Congress on the question of emoluments. So ruling that they had no standing might not necessarily work. However, I guess on the narrow question of ruling on whether they have standing to sue, that could possibly work. The result of that would only, I assume, be that the courts would be saying, suing in Article 3 courts over the emoluments accepted here is just not the right forum. The remedy for violation of the emoluments clause is I guess, impeachment, or presumably you could go with a censure of some sort, but it would be up to Congress to decide what the remedy for a violation of the Emoluments Clause is, not us. And that would ostensibly be a grant of greater discretion and flexibility. The courts can't remove Trump from office, even if they do believe he violated the Emoluments Clause, whereas Congress can. So you'd think it would be better off in their hands. It's just the problem is that the Congress is paralyzed because Republicans control the Senate, where they have simply declared, well, we will never convict him of anything, so it doesn't matter what charges you bring. And as a result, there are many members in the House who say there's no point, despite the obvious violation, there's no point in bringing the charge since nothing will come of it. That's why we went to the courts. It's very disappointing, but I suppose somewhat predictable. That's the only place, the only room, I think, for a ruling about standing getting in their way. And on the one hand, I want to see their suit proceed, because it's great to have the supposedly objective, some people still think objective courts rule that, yes, Trump has violated the law in a major way, violated the Constitution in a major way here, but that by itself doesn't do anything. Congress still needs to be the one to act, to actually hand down the remedy that would be appropriate for something like this. But because they're afraid to do it, I also don't want that to happen, because a court telling this Congress that the only real remedy is in their hands means that they'll say, oh, well, maybe we should just dither for a few more months until our term of office is over, and then it won't be our problem anymore. And I don't want that to be the solution. All right. Continuing with the article, though. Sullivan's ruling was not a surprise. In July, an appeals court in Washington had strongly signaled to Sullivan that he should allow this unusual appeal, ruling that Sullivan had probably, quote, abused his discretion when he denied an earlier attempt. How ironic that the judge is the one abusing his discretion in all of this. But okay. I guess the story was that, so Sullivan denied Trump the ability to make, I guess, an appeal, interlocutory appeal, I guess, immediately to the circuit court, I guess, on the question of standing. And Judge Sullivan said, no, that's not going to happen. And then, in fact, basically they said, well, we're going to appeal that now anyway. And they were granted the emergency appeal, and the D.C. Circuit Court said, Sullivan, you should have allowed them to do that. And now they've kicked it. This is the way these courts work. They kick it back down to him for a reconsideration of whether or not he should have told them in the first place that they weren't going to be allowed to have the appeal that they just had. And then he'll say, okay, yes, you can have it. And then they'll have the appeal. Believe it or not, they consider this appeal not to yet have been considered on its merits. You'd think they would want to save time, but that's process for you. All right. So in July, an appeals court in Washington strongly signaled to Sullivan he should allow this unusual appeal, which he didn't want to. In his ruling now, Sullivan noted that this sort of an appeal, done in the middle of a district court case instead of at its end, is warranted when there is, quote, substantial ground for difference of opinion, unquote, on a key matter of law. The appeals court had indicated that this was such a case, so he agreed to let the appeal go forward. One effect of Sullivan's ruling will be to keep on hold the discovery process, a pretrial fact-finding period. Now, this is where it becomes of broader implications here. During this pretrial fact-finding period, in which the Democrats wanted to serve 37 subpoenas on Trump businesses asking about their foreign customers. In other words, Congress, the House, was investigating, do we have a case for something, whatever it is, against Trump for violating the Emoluments Clause. In order to find out for sure, we need facts. In order to get those facts, we need to subpoena the information from Trump administration officials, from the Trump businesses, etc. And the Trump businesses immediately appeal and say, you can't subpoena us. And so we're now at this situation. The courts haven't yet said whether or not they can subpoena the Trump businesses. They instead have now said, we're going to let the D.C. Circuit Court decide the question, presumably, of whether or not Democrats in Congress have standing to have brought this suit in the first place. And in the meantime, the 37 subpoenas don't get enforced. And that's the broader implication of all of this. We were, not so long ago, hearing bragging from the Democrats in Congress that, we're winning all these cases on the subpoenas, and so we don't actually have to go into a formal impeachment inquiry. Then we had the recess, and we had more people coming out for impeachment inquiries, and there are still more today. And I think it was Jim Langevin, who was the latest one that I saw, joining in the efforts. And then Jerry Nadler saying in court documents elsewhere that we do really have an actual impeachment inquiry underway here. But either way, Democrats in the House were trying to convince us that things were going forward, that we were winning in court. And in some things we were winning, and in some things we weren't. And I guess in this one we find out that 37 subpoenas are now indefinitely on hold until we find out from the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals whether or not Democrats had the right to bring this suit at all in the first place. And if they win, then the suit drags on for another X number of years, months, whatever, past the end of the Trump term in office, and hopefully he loses, and then it ends up, they'll argue, mooting the whole case, and that may or may not bother anybody to moot the whole thing at that point after he's out. But it would be my opinion that you really needed to play these things out, but only because the rule of law is important. But every time we elect a Republican, it isn't. So maybe you're right in a backhanded sort of way. This is useless to begin with. A flip side of that is if we were to then, if quote unquote we as Democrats were to quote unquote lose this case, where the court said that's right, you can't enforce these subpoenas. And in fact, there are lots of subpoenas out there that you're going to be blocked by the courts from enforcing because the enforcement power is in your hands, and you need to enforce them either through the inherent contempt method or finally, ultimately, through the threat of or actual execution of impeachment processes, which will lay the burden squarely at their feet. The only worry is, what if they then say, oh, well, since we're not doing that, it's all over. So I don't know what I want to happen here. I want Trump to drop dead. How about that? Is that going to happen? I don't know. That's outside of the hands of the court. Sullivan had paused the process in July after the appeals court's ruling. That is the process of discovery and the 37 subpoenas that would have made it go. Earlier, attorneys working with the Democrats said that subpoenas delayed would in effect be subpoenas denied, that Trump's first term might run out before the plaintiffs could get any answers. They also questioned Trump's lawyer's argument that the suit was a distraction. That's the old, well, you can't indict a sitting president, and also, you can't involve him in these court cases because it's a distraction from national security and all the other important things that presidents do, like golf on the government dime. But they do point out there's simply no reason, and the president has offered none, this is a good point here, why discovery against businesses that, remember, he plays no role in running. He resigned from all these, he's recused from all these businesses. His sons run them, right? There's no reason to believe that answering subpoenas from a business that he doesn't run would distract him from the performance of his constitutional duties. But apparently that didn't work. Sullivan rejected the argument. He had pretty much been instructed by his bosses, his immediate supervisors, if you will, at the D.C. Circuit Court, that he was to grant this appeal. The decision is another setback for those who hope to use the courts and the Constitution's emoluments clauses to stop Trump's private businesses from taking money from foreign governments. Those clauses, intended to prevent U.S. leaders from being corrupted through their wallets, prohibit presidents from taking payments from foreign states, U.S. states, or the federal government. Until Trump's presidency, they were seen as dusty footnotes from another era, but then Trump chose to keep ownership of his private businesses, including a D.C. hotel that has hosted embassy galas and visiting foreign leaders. You know the story behind all of that. So that's where we now stand. We'll continue with this discussion, no doubt, in the future. Whether or not that is immediately happening tomorrow, I have no idea. We'll see what we can find out. But I can tell you what's coming up next here on Netroots Radio. It is Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, including the stories that Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon has said Trump's anti-immigrant policy is a World War II Japanese-American family detention camp-style operation. No kidding. Kids in border camps are 9 times likelier to die of the flu, something we haven't yet discussed thoroughly with Greg, but need to in the future. But border protection still won't vaccinate them. That's only going to hurt them, as you know, among those affected by that decision.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
More stories coming up. The nation's top health officials are ordered to stay silent as Trump lies about mental health and shootings, and federal courts just made the Electoral College even worse. Moving on from there, Trump is once again trying to pressure world leaders to give Russia a pass, and Brazil's far-right president accused NGOs there of burning down the Amazon.